Tom Pelphrey, you are a total scene stealer on Love and Death as Don Crowder, Candy's attorney. And I know you only got sent the first four scripts of the show, and he's not really in the first four episodes that much. So what were you told about Don and how pivotal the role would be?
Yeah, I was told that the fifth episode starts the trial, and I spoke with David about it, and he said, Don really becomes a central figure in the storytelling. And David also told me, he's like, do yourself a favor and start looking into who this guy really was, because I think you're going to love him as much as I do. And I did. He was right.
Mhm. So you read the articles in Texas Monthly and the book?
Read the articles in Texas Monthly, read the book. The book has a lot of information about Don that we ultimately couldn't use in the show. It just wouldn't fit in storytelling wise. But um, a lot of anecdotes, a lot of stories. It gives you kind of a brief history of Don's life. It's just a really, really fascinating human being. It's also able to find later an article that was kind of an interview with Carol Crowder, although she wasn't Crowder at the time, Don's wife. During the show, they got divorced, and they did an interview with her in the late 90s, and it was very, very insightful into, more of who Don was and the kind of person he was. And yeah.
Mhm. So after gathering all that information and getting the final three scripts, like how did you see the character? Like he really does come alive in those last three episodes. Like I tell everybody, I was like, just wait for Tom Pelphrey in the courtroom scene.
I loved him. I mean, look, I loved every second of it. I've never had more fun playing a role than I did playing Don. I just thought it was so well written. I thought who he was and how he was sort of particularly built to step into that particular moment. The whole that having all the history with the personal defense and having a sense of showmanship and a flair for the sort of dramatic and a keen understanding of controlling narrative, because of the press's obvious intense interest in Candy's case. I think Don knew how to handle that in a way that most other lawyers wouldn't have. I mean, I think there's like an element to media coverage of a trial that we've gotten so used to now. Deadline, true crime, the documentaries on Netflix, HBO, like we've gotten so used to the idea of the media covering cases and crimes. But I mean, this was so novel back then. So the idea of like a rush of cameras and microphones at the courthouse and understanding how to navigate that was, I think it was a gift that Don had that most other lawyers wouldn't have.
Yeah, I always thought that was fascinating because I think it's kind of laughed at when it's brought up that he was a personal injury lawyer and this was his first criminal case, and you just kind of think he's going to flop. But I think
Mm-hmm.
it actually made him effective because his lack of experience in criminal cases was compensated by, like you were saying, his knack for spin and crafting a media-friendly narrative. Like he tells her, you need to look like a mousy housewife, and I'll be
Yeah.
the tough guy, and you have to lose weight. I'll pick out your wardrobe. And he was really like the master puppeteer at the end.
Totally. And he understood the real impact of shaping how the jury was seeing and the story they were telling themselves about his client. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, he was perfect for the moment.
Yeah. And then after her testimony, when she asked him, like, why did you show me Yaks? And he was like, I needed you to show emotion for the jury.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that he was a football player and he got injured. Do you think like that kind of he just like transferred that kind of competitiveness and that drive into law? Like he played to win.
He did. He played to win. I mean, not only was he a football player, but when he started playing football, he was like 5'9" and weighed 140 pounds, which is very small. And he gained almost 50 pounds or maybe he was 150 and got up to 190, maybe 40, 50 pounds of muscle just through hard work, determination, diet, exercising, all of it, and he got hit so hard playing football that his eyeball came out of his skull. They put it back in, obviously. They did surgery on it. He got an invitation the summer after he graduated to go do walk-on tryouts for the then Washington Redskins, the now Washington Commanders. He went. Again, at this point, he weighs 190 pounds, which is so small. Like, if you're going to weigh 190 pounds in the NFL, you're like a very fast wide receiver, and he goes to the tryout and the team doctor looks him over and he's like, there's no way I'm letting you get on that field. He's like, why not? He's like, you have an ocular fracture. And he's like, well, this player and this player has an ocular fracture. You let them play. And he's like, yeah, because they're 250 pounds, 300 pounds, and they've, won MVPs in the league. I'm not letting you on this field because you're like a medical liability. And literally, because they didn't let him try out, he starts focusing on law. I mean, it's just fascinating. So absolutely, this guy was a scrapper. I mean, there's a really interesting like anecdotal story, but I think it sums up Don perfectly. We got to speak with Robert Yudishin, the real Robert Yudishin, who was Don's law partner, and Robert was telling me a story that he had a daughter, and of course Don had his daughters, and Robert said that his girl was like 12 years old and Don's was like 8. And so at the time, Robert was coaching girls basketball, the 12 to 13-year-olds, and Don was coaching girls basketball, the 7 and 8-year-olds. And Robert's like, of course, at that time, the difference between 13 and 8 is like basically adults versus children. And he said, and Don challenged us to a game. And he said, and we accepted. And he said, Don coached that game like his life was on the line.
That's what you
And
gotta do. Just like the case. It was like, this is the only case that matters to one in front of me.
There you go. And Robert told me that before we started filming. I was like, okay, this guy plays to win. This guy plays to win.
What did he win that game?
No.
The girls are too big. You just have to wait until puberty hits.
The height difference was too much to overcome.
But that it just I think it feels like he defended underdogs or championed underdogs because he was an underdog himself. And you could say that Candy was an underdog when the case started because
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I also like how his view of the case and of her shifted, because at the beginning he never thought that she could do it because he was like, you're so tiny, and it was definitely a man, and he thought people were using her as a scapegoat. But then he eventually accepted that she did it after she told him. And I think the turning point was the hypnosis appointment with Dr.
I mean, look, basically you and I agree about everything about this script, so you could just you don't even need to interview me.
Okay, then this is over now.
I think so too. Bye. I thought so too. When I read the whole story, I was like, the turning point has to be whatever he saw or heard in Dr. Faison's office, because again, we're talking about like the novelty of having a bunch of press at the courthouse. How about the novelty of hypnosis, or the idea that there's like a very strong unconscious life that can seep up into our conscious world, and that's a real thing. Like, so much of this we now understand better and take for granted, but I think at that time, especially in a small town in Texas, to like see firsthand the kind of reaction she had to being put under hypnosis, I think that's what sold them.
Mm-hmm. I would say he was pretty ahead of his time in that way too, like being so accepting of something like that when there wasn't a lot of language to talk about mental illness in that way at that time in that small town.
100%, 100%. And it also fits perfectly his understanding of how to work a courtroom, in the sense of there's nothing more important than emotion. Like, there's nothing more important than how we feel about something. And I would imagine what he saw in Dr. Faison's office was so like horrifying and upsetting to him. He was like, okay, like if that's the feeling that this elicits, then we need to defend her. it also explains to me why he was so angry at her for continuing to take Sarax and zone out, because he understood the entire case rests on the emotion of, I guess it's not an emotion,
She has
but
to see the acts and react. Yeah, she couldn't be a zombie.
yeah,
Yeah.
we want to see her emotion to elicit empathy. And if she's shut down, then we're not going to get empathy. We're going to get she's a cold-blooded killer.
Yeah, for sure. In the finale, I love the car scene with Don and his wife, and she doesn't like that he has sullied Betty's reputation as part of his defense, and he says he didn't do that, and she's like, this case will be your legacy, and he kind of dismisses it, and she's like, this is going to eat at you. And again, like, you kind of see a register in him, but he's also kind of brushing it off. So how much of it do you think it was eating at him then? Because I do think he's like a good guy and is fighting for his friend and defending her, and he thinks something in her did snap.
Yeah, I mean, this is all speculation, but I would be surprised if it was eating at him at all during the trial. I wouldn't be surprised if afterward, upon certain, reflections, and that it might have started to bother him. But I think in the cleanest, best way possible, he understood that he had a job to do. And, I think I love that scene in the car. And there was a version of it where we could have just been fighting, but, learning that even after Carol and Don got divorced, they stayed best friends for the rest of his life. Even after he remarried and everything, like, she really loved him and they really had a special friendship. And I thought that scene in the car was just like a really nice opportunity to show a couple that are under stress and disagreeing strongly about important things, and they can talk about it without blowing up. I
Yeah,
thought,
for
I thought
sure.
it was just like a nice little snapshot. I think he understood that on some level the thing she was saying was right, but it was like, I can't even think about that right now.
Yeah, he has to win the case right now.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have a job to do.
hmm
Yeah.
I talked to Leslie Linka Glatter, and she said the real Robert Udushin said after you did the closing argument that you did it better than Don did, so, which it has to be the best compliment you could get.
Yeah, Robert said Tom defended Lizzie better than Don defended Candy. Um, it was amazing. I mean, that it was so incredible. Like, when Robert was there on the day when we were doing all that courtroom stuff, like, after the setups and the takes, to walk out and be like, like, are we okay? And he was like, yeah, that's great. It's so Don, it's so spot on. I mean, that there's no greater compliment you can get, than from the guy who was there.
hmm How did it feel to deliver a David E. Kelly Penn courtroom speech as a character with so much confidence and bluster?
Well, have I said this already? That this is the most fun I've ever had doing a role.
I mean, like, that's kind of like the dream, right? It's like something you check off the bucket list.
Yes, yes, yes. It was like, I mean, it was every day in that courtroom, so much fun. I told David it was like turning up to work and getting to drive around the nicest race car. It was absolutely, it was a blast. Nobody writes that stuff better than David does. And in particular, that character with his confidence and his temper, like, yeah, I've just never had that much fun on the set. And
Mhm.
I'm glad it translated to some degree.
Yeah. Well, we also got to talk about Don's lifestyle because he lives by tanning, taxidermy, and that terranium desk. So let's start with the tanning, because how did you achieve that look?
Well, I tried to tan. It did not go well. My Irish English skin doesn't take to sun very well and never has. So I got burnt once or twice, and finally the makeup, just going outside, just sitting outside, the makeup lady was like, we're not going to do that. So we did a spray tan. And which I also thought was hilarious, even if not the literal truth, then the sort of the sort of somehow the metaphorical truth of like we are going to make sure this is done and perfect. Twice a week, I would go in, get down to my underwear, and just get my whole body sprayed down. Made a fucking disaster of my bedroom and my sheets and my clothing and everything else. I smelled horrible for 4 months, but it was totally worth it. And the desk, I love that you pointed out the desk, because my jaw dropped when I went into Don's office. I was like, what
Incredible.
show are we making? I actually pitched the director. I said, I was so enamored and like amazed by this desk that I was like, can we find a part in the scene where Candy and I just sit on the floor with our backs to the desk so we can have the camera right here?
We did get a wide shot of the desk, because I talked to the production designer Suzuki, and she said she wasn't expecting that, and you just kind of hope that maybe the editors will pick up on something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she did an incredible
they found
job.
that on Facebook Marketplace, she said, which unreal.
I
So
mean, it is why if you really take a second and pause that screen and zoom in on the amount of animals that are stuffed inside that desk, it is shocking. It's a very
we need a
strange.
close up. Some we need like deleted scenes or something, or behind the scenes stuff of that desk.
I also need to go through my phone and see if I didn't take some close-up
Photos.
photos of
Yeah,
the desk.
post it on
If I
Instagram.
did,
So
we'll go on Instagram.
well, Leslie also said she had to, it was very sad, but she had to cut a scene of you in a tanning bed. So what was that scene?
Um, right. I forgot about that. I was like, what is she talking about? There was a scene where, oh man, that is a bummer that we had to cut that
You
one.
totally forgot about it.
I really did. Oh my goodness. Oh yeah. They had a scene where Don had like two tanning lamps in his bedroom. And I was I was in the bedroom having a discussion with Carol with like the eye goggles on, like laid out in like the red light and looked like some kind of like large lizard under a heat lamp. Yeah, I guess they had to cut it, but
Yeah, she said
oh,
it was cut for pacing, but it made her very sad. So
that's so funny. I wonder if we could get that scene somehow. That's so funny. I completely forgot that. But yeah, it was another fun scene. Yeah.
I mean, you were saying like how dirty your sheets got. I was wondering, I was like, how many times did you do laundry? Like,
All the time. All multiple times a week because everything stunk. You know, like that smell of the spray tan. It's not good. And it doesn't just come off when you shower, like you sweat and it's there.
well, what would you ask Dawn if you could?
Hmm. Well, in regards to the show, I would ask him, to tell me what he felt or saw in Dr. Faison's office. I would be curious to like how exactly that landed on him. I interpreted it as something that moved him and surprised him. I guess there's a cynical interpretation where it's just seen as something that would be effective later, but I would be curious about that.
Mhm. I mean, I think the way you played it, especially, like you could see that it hit him really hard. Like he believed that this was something real that she experienced in that moment that took her
Totally.
back. So,
Totally.
well, lastly, you deliver one of my favorite line readings, actually my favorite line reading in the whole show, when you have a contentious relationship with the judge and you just call him fat fuck. But I love the way you do it, because it's a, you could feel the disdain dripping off your lips. So how much fun was that delivering that line? multiple times.
Oh my God. And we're gonna get a new trial on grounds of fat fuckism. Like
Iconic.
I'm telling you, I felt like a kid again. I felt like I was in high school. Like I would sit at home and read these scripts. I'm like, I can't believe I get to go into work and say this shit. Like I can't believe we get to go play these scenes. Yeah, it was a fucking blast. And Bruce McGill, who plays the judge, obviously is such a fucking pro, such an amazing dude. He's been doing this at the highest level forever, and he was so much fun to work with and such a good sport about our banter and our back and forth. Yeah, it really was like it was so much fun. You almost feel like you should return the money.
I wanted more of the fat fucks. I wanted like so because someone can make a supercut of all of them. We didn't get enough.
Yeah, we're still trying to get, David was like, I almost want to write this is me with my sweatpants. David's like, I almost want to write a Don Crowder spinoff. I was like, I'm here for it. I'm here for
I mean,
it.
he ran for governor. We could do that story. So there you
And we
go.
can say all the fat fucks we want.
Exactly. So we're gonna do this. So
Good, good.
well, Tom, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time and congratulations again on the show.
Thank you so much. Great speaking with you too.